Hi, I'm Jason Lewis,
And I'm Todd DeShida.
and this is Climate Optimists, a podcast focused on solving climate change by creating a shared awareness of what needs to be done, why it's possible, and how each of us can play a role. So this week, we'll have kind of a continuation of our discussion of electric vehicles. And before we jump into there, thought we'd cover some EV-relevant climate headlines. So, I don't know your thoughts, Todd, but I kind of looking back over the last 6 months, it feels like automakers are finally starting to make some real commitments around addressing climate change by transitioning to EVs after, 30 years of dragging their feet.
Yeah, exactly. I was surprised. It feels like they're leading on this a little bit, which seems,
Out of character.
counterintuitive. Yeah, I was definitely not expecting that. But
Yeah.
it's awesome.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's sort of like pleasant surprise. So I think the one auto manufacturer that was really kind of out in front first as far as making commitments was Volvo. And, they pledged previously to be fully electric by 2030. They have their Polestar brand, which is basically a luxury spinoff. And that company is working to become the first car manufacturer to produce a carbon neutral car. That is, the entire manufacturing process is carbon neutral, which is pretty fantastic.
Yeah, that's cool.
But talking about our, domestic manufacturers here at home, GM recently announced that it's going to build 2 more U.S. battery plants. That's in addition to the 2 it already has under construction. And it's been continually kind of upping its pledge in terms of its investment in EVs, and it's now up to a commitment of $35 billion by 2025. And in addition to that, by 2035, they've committed to only sell electric vehicles.
Wow,
Which is the first by a U.S. auto manufacturer.
that's crazy.
Ford,
They were the who killed the electric car people, weren't they?
yeah, Ford, GM, a couple of the Japanese auto manufacturers. They all came together to oppose the California Air Resources Board decision.
Right. I don't know if I ever saw that. I should probably check it out. But if I remember correctly, they wouldn't even sell the ones they'd made or something, right?
Right.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah, at the end of the project, because they were eventually able to, with heavy lobbying, overturn the rule.
Right.
And then they crushed the cars at the end of it. Like these people who were just in love with these electric cars they've been driving, they took them all back like some kind of draconian mafia thing, and they crushed them up, and that was it.
Wow. And now they're, going to go back in 2035.
Yeah.
Right, to just selling electric cars. That's interesting.
Yeah, Ford, I think because of a heavy prompting by GM, Ford has also pledged to invest $30 billion in electric vehicles by 2025. So they're pretty comparable in terms of that investment. But Ford has yet to make a commitment in terms of when they're going to phase out internal combustion engines. So with that sort of a lead-in, we want to really talk more about electric vehicles, the emissions associated with driving them, both the manufacturing and the driving. Talk about some of the other items that are concerned for folks, like, moving to, lithium-ion batteries and what does that mean for the environment. It's worth pointing out, though, that transportation really is pretty pivotal when it comes to emissions now in the U.S. It's the largest source of emissions, sitting at 28% according to EPA data. And within that 28%, cars and trucks, basically passenger vehicles, make up about 60%. So, we know EVs are cleaner, and having an EV means that as the electricity sector continues to clean up, the emissions that exist today are even going to go lower.
Right. Yeah, that's a big chunk of total emissions. Like by switching to an electric vehicle, obviously if a lot of people do that, and it looks like there will be a lot more of them, you could really cut a big chunk out of that 28%.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue, especially because it's in the hands of consumers, in some ways it's our easiest way to cut emissions at this point. I mean, it was different when you didn't have, long-range electric cars available, but now, I mean, that's a lever that we can pull. We don't need government to do that.
For sure.
So when we talk about driving an EV versus a gasoline engine, I think it's probably worth pointing out the differences in efficiencies. And when we say efficiency, we mean sort of the energy that either comes into the vehicle as gasoline or as electricity, and how much of that energy gets converted into, power at the wheels. So I think you've done a little bit of homework in terms of looking at numbers around efficiency.
Yeah, I mean, if you're just talking energy to energy, to start with, an EV will convert. It's usually around I think I've seen 80 to 90% of the energy that you're starting with to the wheels, right?
Which is impressive.
Which is really high. And obviously driving. There's all kinds of things that affect that. Driving conditions, accessory use, and stuff like that can either drop or raise or lower that. But conventional engines there were some lows 12%, but I think all the way up to 40% possible. I think some of your higher efficiency cars and diesels and stuff can get up there to that range. But obviously you can see it's significant difference there.
I mean, it's at best half, right?
Yeah, just heat loss. Heat loss is the big one, right? Just conventional engines just lose tons of heat, and that's where a lot of it happens.
So that's where when people see, if they go to buy an electric car, if they're looking up, specifications, people will see that miles per gallon equivalent.
Yeah.
And so that's why they'll see such a higher miles per gallon equivalent for an electric vehicle versus your most fuel efficient.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. So starting out, it makes a ton of sense to be driving an EV. And then when you're talking about emissions, as I mentioned, you've really got two buckets. You've got manufacturing, the process of bringing the vehicle to market, and then the actual driving of the vehicle. And if we talk about driving the vehicle, your emissions really become dependent upon where you live and your power mix. So do you live in California where, you've got a ton of renewable energy? Do you live in somewhere that's got heavier, coal or natural gas?
Like West Virginia or a place like that.
Yeah.
I think has huge coal, right?
Yeah. So regionally it does matter. However, the Union of Concerned Scientists did this great analysis where they looked at these different regions of the U.S. and said, if you fall in this region, your fuel economy, your equivalent fuel economy will be X. And what they found was, on average, across the U.S., we're looking at an equivalent miles per gallon of 88. So even the best hybrid vehicle is in the 50s. So no matter what, you're coming out ahead from an emissions perspective with an EV. And then if you go to a state, like California, where you have a lot more renewable energy, their analysis showed that an electric car is getting really the equivalent of 122 miles per gallon, which is crazy. I mean,
that's awesome.
And the beauty of that is, as we keep going more renewable, those numbers are just going to come up.
But they don't sound as cool, Jason. Just kidding.
I mean, they're definitely quiet. If you like silence, they sound fantastic.
It definitely. And the tailpipe emissions, you're right. Like the manufacturing, there is obviously some of that's still fairly carbon intensive, or at least equivalent to conventional vehicles on the creation of these things.
Right.
But they catch up so fast by not having those tailpipe emissions.
Yes.
It's like the numbers, I think, were, if you're all things being equal, you would catch up buying a new vehicle. You'll catch up in 2 years the difference of the manufacturing of a new EV versus a new gas vehicle. And even a used vehicle, you'll cross that gap in 4 years.
Right.
So the tailpipe emissions of a conventional vehicle are pretty substantial, really.
Well, and you and I talked about this a little bit. The other, side of the coin is that while the power mix that's used to, fuel our electric vehicles is going to get cleaner, you can't get any carbon out of a gallon of gas. Like that, it is what it is.
Yeah, you're right. The power mix thing's getting better and better all the time.
But you're still going to have X number of emissions out of burning a gallon of fuel.
Yeah, you're never going to get out of that. Yep.
Well, and to your point, so we look at manufacturing versus driving. The numbers that we've looked at show that, generally speaking, a gas-powered vehicle, 10% of the emissions, total emissions of the vehicle, are associated with the production, and then about 90% with the driving. So to your point, right, it's the driving is substantially higher. And then when you talk about an electric, it ranges, but anywhere between 14 and 24% come on the manufacturing side, so slightly higher manufacturing emissions, and then 76 to 80% on the driving side.
Right.
So, I mean, the thing that was interesting for me when I looked at that was I was always of the assumption that if I had a used car, it was better to just keep driving it, because a fair amount of the emissions were tied up in the manufacturing process.
Exactly.
A pretty substantial amount. And that may have been true once upon a time.
Right.
But, I mean, what this shows is that's no longer the case.
Mm-hmm.
That if you have the option to buy a cleaner used vehicle or new vehicle, that you should be moving in that direction.
Definitely.
So if we move kind of beyond the emissions piece and start and look at batteries and their impact, I know you did some analysis to kind of take a look at the environmental impact of batteries.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the extraction process for all the metals and things that are needed in these lithium batteries is pretty intense. And I think some of the numbers I showed were that, it was about 2 to 3 times more than a conventional vehicle as far as like toxicity and things that chemicals and the things that could be left in the process. So there's definitely some areas there that to be concerned with about this extraction. And it also seems like something that would help with that would be like some type of global standard, because it does seem like certain countries, I think the U.S. is part of this, they're a little bit more concerned about
Sure.
that extraction process and kind of regulating that. And then there's, like I know a lot of batteries come from China, and it seems like they might not be as concerned with some of the extraction
Right.
costs, human costs and things like that, environmental cost. So it definitely seems like we could definitely benefit from some type of a global standard of
Right.
of extracting this stuff for these batteries.
Yeah, we don't want a situation where, because of tighter environmental restrictions, let's say, put in place in one country, just moves the manufacturing elsewhere because it's cheaper, and then you're really just polluting another area.
Right. And the recycling process, they're doing it, but it's very new right now, and there's just so many batteries in use, and we're so early in the process that we haven't had to deal with, I think, a large number of the recycling of these batteries. But there are plans. I know that the Department of Energy had I think it's called the American Made Challenge, to basically get companies and innovators to try to come up with ideas to be able to recycle like 90% of the materials in these batteries, which would be huge, because there's a lot of metals in these batteries, and if we could recycle all that, we would just be so much further ahead, and we wouldn't have to extract so much new.
Right. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, you're right, because if production of EVs is going to ramp up, but once you get a certain amount of these essential elements like lithium and cobalt, et cetera, in the mix, if you're able to recycle most of that, then you reduce the need for extraction.
So there are efforts definitely out there to try to get ahead, basically, of this problem that could potentially be there for the recycling of all these batteries.
So the other thing that was interesting when we were talking about some of the research you'd done was this idea that when a car kind of reaches end of life, in some degree, in some ways, it's not like a, something catastrophically fails. It's more like those fun times when your cell phone, you charge it up and then by the end of life, it's dead within like 30 minutes. You can make about 3 calls and that's it.
Right.
But you were calling out the fact that like, even if a battery does get to that point, whatever that is, that there's the opportunity still to make use of it in other applications.
Yeah. I mean, there's all these second use applications that they're trying to figure out for these batteries. So they're kind of estimating, I think, that by the end of life for a lot of these vehicles, like the batteries would still maybe have like 70% capacity.
Oh, wow.
Possibly. So pretty high, really. I think that myth that all these batteries were just going to completely go dead or be terrible and, early on in the electric car surge have I think that's been disproven by now pretty much. It looks like it's not going to be the case. It looks like the batteries are going to be fairly consistent and fairly stable. And I think you've talked about this to me about basically like power grid situations where you could have a lot of these batteries to kind of use this storage. If you basically combine them together as storage capacity for like a solar situation, or if a factory or some place had a lot of solar power, you could use these batteries as kind of a storage capacity for some of that generation.
Yeah, I mean, most new renewable energy, like commercial or industrial size installations, are looking at storage when they put together their kind of financial pro forma. And yeah, this would be, I don't know what the process of getting the batteries out of the car and turning them into, a stationary battery looks like.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it would seem like a perfect way to get some more life out of those batteries.
Definitely.
And yeah, I mean, reduce, reuse, recycle, right? So the reuse side,
yeah,
would provide some, extra value before those things are, need to be recycled.
Yeah, definitely.
So with EV adoption, we're talking about all these good things about EVs. I think the inevitable question is sort of what's gonna ensure that we move quickly. And while the prices of EVs have come down, especially among kind of the luxury brands, they're still in a place where they're not, not really attainable for somebody who's in the, lower income class. And there's still a lot of people who are reticent to buy, right? You've got some early adopters that have jumped on, but you have a lot of people that are maybe still more in a wait and see. And so I think that's where incentives are going to be hugely important. And we talked about those a little bit in our previous episode. I think the best way to kind of summarize is that we need more of them. So both continuing the federal level incentives, expanding it to the degree possible, state level incentives as well. And the ideal mechanism there is having instead of a tax credit, having a rebate. And then you can package that with like, the point of sale so that right away, somebody goes in, it's like you get those ads from the car dealerships, 2,000 cash back, right?
Right.
And that would then be the case with the EVs. So, you have that, you get that money right away, the discount right away, the value of it, versus a tax credit, which is still beneficial, but you have to wait till you file your taxes. And if you aren't somebody who pays a lot of taxes, if you don't make a ton of money, it doesn't have quite the value.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, I think being able to expand those credits, and there's efforts underway to do that, is going to be hugely impactful. So I think, as always, the most important question is, what can we do as individuals in terms of helping with this transition? And in this case, I guess the obvious is buy an electric car. And Todd is going to give us his top 3, 10, 15 reasons for buying an EV.
I am. No, I am. Well, my reasons are simple. Of course, I wanted to do something that was good for the environment and good for carbon footprint, which I think we've
demonstrated
proven.
Yeah.
without a doubt, scientifically, between the two of us, that there is no further conversation to be had. But seriously though, that was one reason. But beyond that, I've really just enjoyed driving the thing. It's really one of my favorite cars that I've ever had, if not my favorite. It's just so easy.
Do you feel cool? I mean, is it like you feel sexy when you're driving it, or?
I think that ship's pretty much sailed, but so there's no rescuing me on that. I don't think anyway, no matter what I was driving. But when I come out the door, and I'm like, because I still have my traditional car, and I'm just like, I don't want to drive that thing. Like, it's so easy to just hop in the electric, and it just goes, It's just easy to drive. It's quick. It's quiet. If quiet is your thing, it's definitely quiet. You don't have to go to the gas station.
Yeah.
You just drive where you want to go, and you come home, and you just plug it in, and you're good to go.
It's easy.
It's very easy. It's been awesome that way.
And easy's good for you. So.
Well, and there's not a lot of maintenance you have to worry about.
And we rather did a, pretty in-depth look at this in our past episode, but yeah, you're right. Like, maintenance costs are substantially less. It is just simpler to own.
Yeah.
Being able to charge from home.
Yeah,
what do you say?
Do you have similar reasons for it? I mean, your car does look a lot cooler.
I mean, that could be said. I mean, I don't know if it makes me cooler, but it looks cool. People were disappointed when they see who's driving it, but no, it certainly the ease of operation. Just it's simple, right? I like the range piece like that because that was initially, I think, the limiter for me, or the worry about buying an EV was range. I have a Tesla Model 3, and it's 300 miles, and I even questioned at the time whether 300 was going to be enough, but it really has been, because my girlfriend and I go on a lot of trips, climbing mountains, climbing rocks, playing in the water, and so when you go on those road trips, you want to be able to have peace of mind you can get there, and there are now charging stations in almost every town. Now, they're not all superchargers,
Yeah.
If you don't plan your trip adequately, you could be stopping at a diner for, some pancakes and eggs while, it charges up a little bit, but
That's fine.
I mean, for the most part. So no, the range, the acceleration, it's fun to drive in that respect. And what else? No, I think you covered it pretty well. So Todd has hopefully convinced you, if you had any remaining doubts, that you need to go buy an electric car. And, buying can take two forms, right? You can buy brand new and get access to tax rebates, tax incentives. We have some links on our website where you can see what tax credits and rebates you're eligible for, depending on what state you live in. But you can also buy used. If you're not quite ready to buy a, long range car, make that big investment and have that be your one car, the beauty is there are used cars now on the market, used electrics, like a Nissan Leaf that you can pick up for $5,000 to $6,000, and then that becomes your grocery getter, your in-town car, and that gives you a great way to try it out. It also reduces the amount of miles you're putting on your gasoline vehicle. The other option, which I think you acquired your Spark this way, was to go with a lease. I know right now Hyundai, their Kona model, which is a electric SUV, you can get into their lease program, but I think when you got into the Spark, that was via a lease as well.
It was, yeah. I leased that car. We leased that car for the first 3 years. I think I heard from a friend, and they were like, "I leased this car for $100 or something like that," and I'm like, "What?" And so we went in there, and sure enough, it was like $117 to lease it, and we were like, "Well, you can't really beat that." So
it's almost a joke, right?
Yeah, we just did it, and it was awesome, and we kind of fell in love with the car, and so we ended up buying it. But yeah, the lease, I would highly recommend that. It was great.
Yeah, so check out the lease option if you're not ready to buy, and get a chance to really experience what an EV is like. And then in the meantime, drive less. Get out on your bike, get back in mass transit, carpool. It's all about reducing our carbon footprint wherever we can.
Yeah, ride your bike. No. Walk. No.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're looking for offsets, we can send Todd a note. We can put him on a bicycle where he can generate electricity, and then he can basically work off your carbon.
I could probably generate enough to maybe charge my cell phone about halfway up.
Yeah, in addition to kind of personal decisions or personal actions, the other piece that we can all do is encourage our members of Congress to pass additional tax incentives and rebates. That's really what's going to accelerate the EV transition, which we desperately need. To make that easier, head to our website. We have some talking points that you can use. It doesn't matter if you sound polished. What matters is that your member of Congress is hearing from a constituent. It's actually surprising how few people actually send a email that they've written or make a phone call to their member of Congress. It really does make a difference.
Yeah, those things add up.
So thanks for tuning in. Come back next week for more climate solutions, reasons for hope, and ways each of us can make a difference. Climate Optimists is made possible by Climate Stewards Collective. You can find us on the web at climateoptimist.co. That's climateoptimist.co. Follow us on social at Climate Stewards Collective.